We went to Gatorland. We went to Gatorland. Absolutely.
Years ago,
Here you go.
it was small. But bold men journeyed far in the name of their gods to make it big. They came from the northern lands to put down roots. Roots were their religion, along with dwarves, fire giants, and wolves. They abandoned the land, but the roots grew into this here cradle of liberty. By the time he came around, the one they called Magnus, he resembled the modern world. Except beneath it all, in every which way, it wasn't that modern, and it wasn't a world singular. There were 9 of them. And let's just say that these worlds, they didn't get along too well.
Let's give it up for the #1 New York Times best-selling author, the storyteller of the gods. Here he is, Riordan!
Thank you guys for coming out tonight. It is really great to be back in the area. I think it's been like 5 years since I've been to this part of Florida. So it's really, really awesome to be back. Well, I thought what I'd do is I would tell you a little bit about, how I became a writer, because people tend to be interested in that, what happened with my stuff and how I got published and all that. I'll tell you a little bit about the books, and then I'll tell you about Magnus Chase and some stuff that's coming up after that. And then we're going to get to some questions that you guys wrote when you came in for me. Well, first of all, how do you get to be a writer? I don't know. I've heard it said that to be a writer, you kind of have to have a miserable life, and be all sad and stuff. And I guess it's true. I had a pretty terrible childhood. There I am. I know. You can tell nobody loved me, right? Yeah. That's a picture of me in my grandfather's lap. To the left of him is my mom, and that's my uncle on the other side. My granddad, we always called him the Colonel because he was a U.S. Air Force colonel in World War II, and he was a great storyteller. The thing I remember most about him is when I was a little older than that, he used to sit me on his lap, and he had a briefcase full of blank paper. And he used to take out paper and he would make up stories off the top of his head and draw pictures to go along with them. And I was fascinated. I couldn't believe he could just do that like off the top of his head. I decided I wanted to be someday a storyteller like that. My parents were pretty good storytellers too. My dad was a pretty great guy. We used to do all kinds of, vigorous, manly activities together. That was one of our favorite sports. I'm still pretty good at it. He read me my first book of mythology. My mom was an art teacher in the public schools, so that's where I got my impeccable fashion sense. Yeah, there I am rocking the hat at the pool. She bought me my first car. Thank you. But I loved stories that they would tell me. I didn't so much like to read. I was a very reluctant reader when I was small. And they told me that someday I would have to go to school and I would have to read books on my own. And I said, no thanks, I'm out of here. Hit the streets at an early age. Yeah. No, not really. I stuck around. But I said, if you're going to read, at least make it interesting. About the only thing that I liked to read were these. Oh, yeah. I love comic books. My uncles had this old war chest full of gold and silver age Marvel and DC comics. And that's the first thing I love to read. And you'll notice already we're getting into the mythology. Here's Superman, and he's being turned into a lion by Circe, the sorceress. Hey, yeah. And over here, of course, the mighty Thor. And that was my introduction to Norse mythology. Well, that would have been great if I could just read that stuff forever. Unfortunately, things got bad, and I went to that definite kind of Tartarus known as middle school. These were my teachers in middle school. I don't remember all of them. Let's see, I remember that guy. That's Mr. Fielder, my band teacher. He was sort of a disco, chain-smoking kind of guy. I remember him. That's Mr. Phelps. He was my American history teacher. We were pretty sure he was an android. He had absolutely no emotion. He would be like, "You will now turn in your homework." Exterminate! Exterminate! The only thing scarier than the teachers were the students. Oh yeah, there's my groovy class in 8th grade. This, I didn't know this at the time, but this girl right here on the bottom row, she would someday be my wife. That's Becky. And this is from her yearbook. And you notice how over here she's written Foxy next to this guy? That's not me. That's me. Yeah, what can I tell you? Hey, man, I hated middle school so much. But I did discover a really, really great book, The Lord of the Rings. And that's like the first series that I remember reading and thinking, wow, reading can actually be fun. It's not just something they assign you. And I had a wonderful English teacher, Mrs. Pabst. Mrs. Pabst was great. She said, "Rick, if you like The Lord of the Rings, you really need to check out mythology, especially Norse mythology, the story of the Vikings, because that's where Tolkien got all his ideas for The Lord of the Rings." And so she introduced me to the Norse dudes. Odin, Loki. Yeah, he's like looking at the people boiling in the lava and saying, "Haha, that's cool." And of course, Thor with his hammer. Oh, they were so cool. I decided that I liked reading so much that I wanted to become a writer when I was in 8th grade. And I wrote a story for my English teacher, and she said, "Rick, this is great. Why don't you send it into a magazine and see if you can get it published?" Now, guys, this was way before Wattpad, okay? And if you wanted to publish, the only way you could do it is mail it off in the actual mail, because there was no internet, and wait and hope that a magazine would publish it for you. So that's what I did. I waited 2 months, and finally this came in the mail. That's my first rejection note. Yeah, the guy was pretty nice. He says, "Dear Rick, for somebody who's 13, this is a pretty great story. It's really good, but we can't publish it. It's not really our thing. Keep trying." My mom was so proud that I got rejected. She put this in a frame and she put it in her house, and I had to look at it every time I walked through the living room. True story, when I was in college, my mom's house burned to the ground. Everything was destroyed. Except that. They pulled the letter out of the fire just fine, and it's still hanging in my mom's house. It's a powerful thing. I never did get published in middle school. I went on to high school, and that was a time in my life I like to call the attack of the hair. Yeah, I'm rocking the look, I know. It was another difficult time for me. That's a picture from my journal that I kept all during high school. I was a pretty bad troublemaker. I printed a underground newspaper that made fun of like everybody at the school. And they knew I was doing it, but they couldn't prove it, even though I was using the school's printer to make it. But I did get kicked out of classes, my grades were terrible, I was a bad student. I probably would have dropped out of school, except one good thing happened to me in high school. I met a girl.